What was God's purpose for Adam and Eve? When God created Adam and Eve, He had a purpose for them. He created man in His image, and man and woman were to be embodied and to perfect His love. God created humans in His own image and likeness, which means that we were not made to resemble God, but to reflect God's love and goodness. We were set apart from all His other creations and have both a material body and immaterial soul. Adam and Eve were created with the purpose of loving each other and to enjoy God's creation, which was good, and to live a happy life on earth with original justice and holiness, which was the state of Adam and Eve before they sinned. They possessed sanctifying grace with the right to enter heaven. They were in a right relationship with themselves, each other, and other creation. God also created Adam and Eve to take care of their home and for their offspring to be born into perfect conditions. When God created the Garden of Eden, He first placed Adam and Eve in it. This place was known as paradise. It was a perfect, beautiful place of many plants and rivers. Before the fall of man, the Garden of Eden was referred to as paradise because it was where man and woman first lived naked without shame and lived among the animals and nature. They were free and the place was absolutely perfect. This is read about in Genesis chapter 2 verses 8 through 9 in the Bible. The Lord God planted a garden in Eden in the east and planted there the man whom He had formed. Out of the ground the Lord God made grow every tree that was delightful to look at and good for food, with the tree of life in the middle of the garden and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. God had prohibited Adam and Eve to eat from this tree of knowledge of good and evil. He said it would result in them being expelled from the Garden of Eden and in their death. This is read about in Genesis chapter 2 verse 16 through 17. The Lord God gave the man this order: "You are free to eat from any of these trees of the garden, except the tree of knowledge of good and evil. From that tree you shall not eat. When you eat from it, you shall die." The temptation of the devil and the fall of man. When Adam and Eve were first in the Garden of Eden, they weren't alone. The serpent was also there. He was known as Lucifer, who was originally an angel that turned from God. He represented evil, which is not created by God. Evil is not a thing that was created, but is an absence of good due to the straying away from God. The serpent tempted Adam and Eve to eat from this tree of knowledge of good and evil, and eat the forbidden fruit that God told them not to eat. He told them that God was lying to them and didn't want them to eat from the tree because He didn't want them to be as smart and as good as Him. He said that God was lying about them dying. Eve fell for these tricks and ate the forbidden fruit, and Adam followed her. This was the first sin, known to us now as original sin.
Thing that Adam and Eve noticed after they ate the fruit of the tree of knowledge was that they were naked, so they covered themselves up with leaves. This was a feeling that they had never felt before they ate the fruit because they were pure. So instead of owing up to their mistakes, Adam and Eve tell God that it's one another's fault. Them lying to God was a result of them eating the forbidden fruit. They had done the one thing God had asked them not to do, so He banished them from the garden forever. They regretted eating the fruit and felt the consequences of their actions. This was probably the first time humans had experienced fear, guilt, and shame for what they'd done.
Events of the fall of man had a very serious effect on humans. An immediate effect of the fall was the separation from us and God. When Adam and Eve lied to God about eating the forbidden fruit, that broke their bond that they had. Adam and Eve became ashamed and even began to fear God. Due to the fall, death became very real. Every living thing was to die, as God said. The fall of man represents the first sin and is the original sin that we are all born with. Because of this, we all die at one point. Because of this, we also have weakening of our will and intellect, which is the reason why many of us can stray away from God so easily and sin so quickly.
So why exactly did God create Adam and Eve if he knew the fall would happen? God gave Adam and Eve free will, which gave them the choice of eating the fruit or not. This was all part of God's plan for human salvation. With the fall of humanity, God sent Jesus to grant us salvation from these sins Adam and Eve committed. This salvation was the key for humans to see the true glory and goodness of God. If the fall had never happened, we would have never needed grace or redemption, and we wouldn't have ever experienced the splendor of Christ. Even when Satan had turned away from God, it was all part of his plan to give humans their salvation.